So we will start the day with the sustainable tourism. So we welcome today to our roundtable Thomas Deschamps, the head of the Tourism Observatory at the Paris Tourist Office. We've got Caroline Mignon, who's stuck in public transport, apparently. Anna Verenke, who's head of Welcome City Lab, unfortunately is unable to be with us today for health reasons, and Julia LUCZAK-ROUGEAUX, who is our moderator, and she is the editor-in-chief of TOM.TRAVEL magazine. So, over to you, Julia. Thank you so much, Annabelle, for your introduction. Well, as you can see, we have a small team, but I'm sure we have plenty of things to talk about with Thomas on trends in sustainable tourism. So, since we're going to have time together, perhaps let's start by telling us, what you do at the Paris Tourist Office, and then we'll start focusing on sustainable tourism. So tell us, what's the connection and what type of collaboration is possible? Hello, everyone. So, Thomas Deschamps, I'm head of the Observatory on Sustainable and Accessible Tourism. That's that's a part of the Paris Tourist Office. So what we did was that, we, of course, do statistics on the type of tourists and what they do when they come to Paris. That's already a lot of work. But then we also have an observatory that wants to better understand what's going on. And this is not something that the marketing team does, in fact. So we are focused on sustainable tourism in my department. Okay, so that's important to keep in mind. So in concrete terms, what's the mission of your observatory? Well, first of all, we monitor the tourism statistics. We collect the information. We want to see where tourists are going because, we do have this challenge of trying to get tourists to visit not just the main monuments to get a better distribution. And so, the tourist office, of course, wants to promote tourism, but we really want to be able to better structure the types of tourism. And so another aspect of my work tied to sustainable tourism is to try to develop other modes of mobility, like cyclotourism, fill in some gaps as well. So, for example, when we talk about accessibility, in fact, we don't have enough information about sites that are accessible or not accessible to people with physical disabilities, and yet we will be host in 2024 to the Paralympics. So we need more information about that. So a lot of our work is around how to better coordinate and organize tourism in the Paris region. Okay, so we'll be talking about that and the expectations of tourists. So you've said that this is your mission. Sustainable tourism is the mission of a specific office that you are the head of, and it hasn't been given to the marketing department. And so you say that's a rather significant choice. Okay, so the definition of sustainable tourism, let me read this for you. So the World Tourist Office says it's a tourism that takes into account the economic, social, and environmental impacts in the present and future. So this is the official definition for sustainable tourism. So let's get to the heart of the topic then. So what are the trends in sustainable tourism? What are some of the main trends, new behaviors, and where are we headed with this? Well, that's an excellent question. But it depends who you ask. If you're asking the professionals who are working on an ecological transition of their own model of producing cultural content, or are we speaking to tourists? You're asking the question of tourists. There are consumers, well, if we consider them as consumers. Now, at the Tourist Office of Paris, okay, we have limited resources like many businesses. So what we've decided to do is to try to work with tourism professionals to structure their work. Because a tourist, as a consumer, will adapt to the supply. In fact, so we need to structure that supply because there's a fair amount of inertia on the part of consumers. These consumers might be willing to change their dishwashing liquid to something that's more organic, but for their tourism, it's, they're not taking a vacation to save the planet. They want a good experience for themselves and their family, so there's a certain antagonism here in the minds of the tourists, and we can see this in the surveys. If we ask people, you'll all say, oh yes, I want to travel with less impact. I want my tourism to be more sustainable, to use cleaner modes of transport, being with local communities. But at the end of the day, they book their tickets. When they book their tickets, they forget about that. That's not what's actually happening, in spite of what people are saying. And so for us at the tourist office, we can't tell tourists to consume differently. The entire world comes to Paris. We can't have impact on everyone. So what we would rather do is focus our efforts on the supply side. Because an environmental transition is not easy for any business, particularly if you want it to work well and that it will have a genuine reduction in carbon emissions and all other negative aspects. So the idea is also to help the professionals to make this happen, and not just as a marketing ploy. Because, yes, there is a fair amount of greenwashing, it's true. Okay, what about the effort in hotels about towels? Maybe tourists are fine, keeping the same towel for 3 days, but then the cleaning people who come into the rooms change the towels every day. So, that it's not easy to manage. We know that. What about the single-use plastics? That all of the tourist accommodations are trying to do this more and more. But at the same time, well, plastics, avoid, plastic goodies in your museum that are made in China. So a shop can do something about this. But nonetheless, it's not that easy to manage because you can have organically sourced plastics, but they're still made of plastic. We ourselves had been thinking about doing this with our brand, I Love Paris. But then we said, well, no, it's still, if it winds up out in nature, it's a danger, it's a hazard for wildlife and the environment. And so we have tried to evolve, to move away from a plastic, and we have to tell people this is what we're doing. But then the suppliers, are our suppliers using less plastic? And are people willing to pay more so that there is less of an environmental impact? So for a museum, for a hotel, for a restaurant, these things are different. You have to change your whole management process. The cleaning staff, for example, are they aware? Have they been properly trained? What about cultural sites? That means there has to be more training of staff to do more. Okay, so it's not so new. In fact, yes, it's a trend for the long term. I mean, the thinking around plastics, of course, will take time. But what would you say today? Are you seeing then greater awareness on the part of visitors at the same level as professionals? Well, yes, I would say that, yes, the visitors as consumers, we are seeing more awareness. Last year, for example, one thing that in France, for example, between COVID and the massive forest fires in France, the French people have become more aware of the impact of, the global connections, a pandemic, global warming. So I think there is greater awareness now that we can certainly see in France in any case. But, are people going to be consistent? They have greater awareness, but as I said, but then taking virtuous action is more difficult. Because first of all, there's got to be the change on the supply side, changing, who your suppliers are. It may means you're changing clients. It's a change of image. These are things can take time for service providers and the tourism professionals. And, well, it's a lot of extra work, so it's hard to get it done. So you told me the other day that we have to rethink our whole business models as well. And it's hard. I mean, in Paris, for example, given the large numbers of tourists, how do you then imagine doing things differently? Well, yes, particularly when you're successful. A lot of, tourism professionals say, well, hey, the tourists are here. Why do we have to do things differently? So sometimes, convincing people who are doing good business to change is not easy as well. But it's not just because you're not using plastic in any of the goodies in the shop that you're going to have more visitors to the museum, for example. That's not going to bring in more visitors. And so that's why awareness is not enough. And we do need to make sure that we draw some lessons from recent crises, that we learn from these crises, but a crisis can be an opportunity in the sense that it spurs people into action. And so consumers are, I think, are going to start putting more pressure on professionals for them to, to speak up and say, why did you change my tiles? I'm only here for, 2-3 nights. You didn't need to change my hotel. And why is there a plastic bottle of water in my room? Everyone needs to cut back on plastic. Why are you giving me a plastic bottle of water? And so this is something people need to speak up as well. But there's a whole lot of details, many points to cover. Okay, we've talked about the supply side and the marketing side. What about marketing? You said, well, some hotels are starting to say, so, for example, if you're in the 20th district, maybe you're not going to use images of the Eiffel Tower on the far side of town. So, should we stop promoting always the same tourist sites, which are completely overrun, and try to turn the spotlight on smaller smaller sites to visit? Well, for us at the tourist office, are we going to spend money? We're not going to spend money, of course, to say, there's the Eiffel Tower is here. Come see the Eiffel Tower. Okay, so we're lucky in the sense that everybody knows that it's there. So we are quite lucky in that sense compared to other destinations. We've got this icon of Parisian tourism, but I think it really reflects a certain era that represented Paris some time ago. But I think today in tourism, it's important to show what's going on all over the Paris area. And so it's true that a lot is concentrated all along the Seine, river. So so look at the Louvre, 9 million visitors at its peak. They cannot take in any more people without really deteriorating the visitor experience, which is something they don't want to do. And so it's true that COVID was an opportunity to put in place the reservation system. So it means that tourists have to plan more for their stay. They have to plan ahead of time. So I think what we need to show now is that Paris isn't the capital of the 19th century. Okay, it's a working city. It's a creative city. It's a productive city. People live here. It's a living place. And in fact, a lot of museums actually show this. And so we shouldn't be limited to just the showcase sites. Of course, they have their importance, but for us, and for us, as tourist promoters, we have the great good fortune to have such icons of tourism, but at the same time, it means that we don't have to do any more work to promote those, so that's a good thing, and we can focus our efforts elsewhere. So, for example, if we look at, cycling around Paris, new ways of discovering the city, this is something that's become much more important, and it demonstrates that the city is rising to the challenges of the 20th century and the 21st century, of course. and to show all of the greenery around the city as well. Draw attention to the fact that the city is doing more, because this is what the city is doing now. Okay, what about the local focus? Okay, so you mentioned, for example, there are some local artisans. Perhaps there can be, I don't know, networking of the neighborhood hotels and local artisans. What about that? Well, yes, local sourcing is important so that you are not offering products that require too much transport or use of plastic. So these are the things that count now. We know that transportation weighs in heavily in the carbon footprint of business and tourism in particular. And so buying things closer to home, produced truly as close as possible to where it's going to be used, is the best solution. It might cost more in one sense, but there are hidden costs to things that you buy from China. And so I think consumers are beginning to understand some of those hidden costs, the impact on employment in addition to the impact on environment because of the transport and the materials used. So by promoting local production also promotes the local economic fabric of which you are a part. And I think tourists are interested in that as well, to see the connections between the local life and perhaps the artworks in front of him, to feel this connection, this microcosm. People are interested in that specific experience. Okay, so that visiting Paris, Amsterdam, New York would wind up being the same? No, they each have to have their own identity and way of life. That's what people want to discover. You know, in the 1960s in Amsterdam, it wasn't a bicycle-friendly city, and now it's well known for that. So this is something interesting for tourists, that they want to have that same experience as the people who live in Amsterdam. Okay, so you said expectations of tourists are evolving. It's not always easy to understand these, identify and understand these. So how do you go about this? What about these labels, quality labels? Well, this is something that's interesting for businesses that want to make progress in their environmental transition, because you set yourself goals, and there's the auditing body that will help you to do this, to reach those goals, how to go about things. Of course, and there are different labels, quality certifications, depending on the type of business you're in. I think these are quite useful. But at the same time, I'm talking about the sustainable development, but it doesn't mean that it will bring more clients, okay? You have to keep this in mind, in fact, because frankly, can anyone here in the room say the difference between Green Globe and the Green Key, as they're known, those quality certificates? Well, and yet consumers don't know the differences are between those, if one is good or better than the other. Okay, so they can be a useful tool, and I think it is important to make that effort. But at the Paris Tourist Office, what we're interested in is a commitment. Even if you're starting from zero, or if you are close to obtaining certification, what's important is to start to commit to improvement. For us, we are part of the GDS index, so that we can benchmark ourselves against other tourist destinations in terms of sustainable tourism. We were 55th last year, and now we are 25th this year. Well, we rose quickly, partly because we were starting from pretty far down the scale, and we had to formalize our measurements as well. But it does allow everyone to start from a baseline, to determine the baseline and work up from there. So tourism and culture are very closely related, of course. So tell us, are cultural venues also concerned by these same issues, and what role can they play? Well, I think all economic establishments or businesses have a role to play in the ecological transition. So the museum and cultural sites are a showcase of a culture, be it historic or contemporary, and so they need to contribute in their own way, and they can take advantage of their position as a showcase. For a modern art museum to continue using plastics with a lot of their shop full of things made in China, I think would be, a bad thing. But you also have to manage water usage, energy consumption in their venue, but that's something that every single business needs to be doing. Culture is an economic player. It's a big player in France. Our, French culture is well known and admired, and so perhaps we have even more responsibility for our cultural venues to be measuring their impact in order to make improvements and to try to, think about how we organize exhibitions. It's not just about eliminating China-made products from the shop. It's everything to organize an exhibition, bringing artworks from far away. So it's really from A to Z. Now I'm not saying that a museum needs to devote more resources to promoting its ecological efforts. They need to be focused on promoting their exhibits. With their limited resources, this is understandable. But at the same time, it is something that they can talk about with their staff, for example, and when we talk about employment across all sectors, in tourism and culture, there's employment is quite an issue. So can more be done to value that employment? And so, yes, but it's true. At the same time, cultural venues can have difficulties hiring, given their limited resources. But, we are not asking museums to start producing posters to show what they're doing for the environment. But they can communicate about it, but they won't have much budget for that. And then we also understood during the health crisis that, suddenly people were cut off from being able to visit. But they are, at the same time, they are a showcase, and so they are a platform. They can speak up from that position of high visibility. So, for example, well, I mentioned those plastic bracelets that we decided not to make, but we decided we wanted something made in Paris, in the Paris region. Okay, we had considered that option of biosourced plastic, but it wasn't easy to find something made in the Paris area. But we felt it's our responsibility to help promote businesses that are making such products, and it's a win-win situation. Here we are trying to show the diversity of the Paris area, so we should not be selling tourists a plastic Eiffel Tower made in China, particularly to Chinese tourists. Okay, so we're talking about the link between tourism and culture. How can they better cooperate? There's going to be a talk later today about transportation, but is there also more to be done? For example, a museum is selling train tickets. I mean, what are we trending toward? Well, there's definitely synergies to be achieved between a museum and a local territory. Now, transportation is certainly not an easy thing to do because it's managed by regions and tourists don't represent, we've got 50 million tourists in the Paris region, but they are not going very far in the, they are not going that far on the Paris region transport, okay? But again, as we said, it's we are a showcase, so we can talk about it. And 50 million people, okay, I didn't mean to make it sound like that wasn't many people. It's a lot, but at the same time, the possibilities for a cultural institution to have an impact in its local area, I think we mustn't overlook these opportunities. We organize exhibits that sometimes go on tour, but I think it is important to have a local focus. Also, because many cultural institutions are not aiming for the global international tourists. They're targeting an audience that's much closer at hand, whereas other museums, it's almost all foreigners.
So I think we need to look at that and at the possibility to actually target a local group of visitors rather than foreign tourists. I think that's interesting. Thank you, Thomas. And good morning, Caroline Mignon. We were talking about sustainable tourism, and it's great to have you. Apparently you had some issues with the local transportation. We don't have a lot of time left. And your mic is off. All right. So this is a last-minute question. We had a lot of content prepared. I'm afraid we won't have time to cover it. All right, so my question is this. What is the main message on the next trends for sustainable tourism? If you had to sum up everything that we had prepared and you can sum it up in only 3 minutes, what would you like to tell us? What is your key message and how can culture articulate with that? Yes, in a couple of minutes indeed. All right, so we need to rethink the tourism model. It's a very concise way of saying it, but of course it's not very self-explanatory. So what do I mean by that? We need first to look at new indicators. We need to measure sustainability and the progress towards more sustainability in a different manner. And just like any other sector, sector, we need to take into account global challenges, climate change, biodiversity, just to name a few. So all the players in sustainable tourism have to commit to that, and it's an environmental transition, but also a social transition. I think we are all aware that it's getting more difficult to recruit the right people in our sector. We need to make our sector more attractive for that. We need to remain meaningful. And tourism, of course, is mostly made of visitors, actually. They are the lifeblood of tourism. And we need to be able to create new offers that take into account those challenges. We need to be less carbon intensive, we need to have a lower footprint, and we need to be more socially responsible. All of that at the same time. That's a matter for survival. Yes, even though being optimistic, I don't like that word of survival. It's not just that. But it's true that there are some trade-offs. When you look at ground usage, at resources, at space in general. For us, tourism is essential. We think of it as an essential sector, and it is, because it brings about a lot of different benefits. I don't have to list them all, you know them. But when you have a trade-off, when you have to choose whether tourism is going to get that space or some other sector, then tourism is not always going to win. And we need to be able to innovate. It's not just about minimizing the negative impacts of what we do. We also need to improve on the positive impacts that we have on local spaces and the local inhabitants as well. The main trend that you also had identified was the higher awareness of those issues. Yes, I've worked with many local authorities on this sustainability transition, and indeed there is a lot more awareness now that we need to rethink the model. So now we don't have to convince local authorities anymore. Instead, we are co-creating solutions. We're trying to identify the best solutions. So that's true for tourism offices. That's also true for the sites and companies themselves, hotels, museums. We help them, we support them in that transition. And sometimes it's very, very hands-on, very concrete. It's about choosing the right sources for their power. It can be very concrete again. And at the same time, we also need to raise awareness among the audience. But we need to do that in a positive way. We don't want it to be riddled with anxiety. This is about getting better and not about being a punishment. What about the collaboration between tourism and culture and the collaboration there? How can those two sectors work together for more sustainability in tourism? I was absolutely delighted when you invited me, and I'm so sorry that I was late today, because I think that we need this link between tourism, purely tourism, and culture. We really need to have this relationship. And in the past, those two sectors sometimes failed to really communicate or work together closely. Not that they were enemies, but they did not really work together. And in our tourism offer, we need to make sure that we give enough space to museums. And conversely, museums need to take tourism issues into account. And we need to have really a very close cooperation, and we need to find solutions together. You don't want to have like tourism players doing one thing and cultural actors doing another thing separately. I think that's not the right way to do that. We need to work on new tourism offers, and that also means integrating cultural offers in what we do. And I think that in the cultural sector, conversely, you also identify tourism as being a co-player. And yes, we do need to work together. And again, in the past, these two sectors did not really interface all that well. I've been working in the sector for 25 years, and that's really something that I find to be sad about that. And this goes through the offer and through the marketing of the different offers, having different promotion strategies. I think that most museums are there in sectoral organizations, in the département tourism offices, but very often you have a tourism directorate and a cultural directorate. Again, they're separate. So you have those silos and everyone is trying to do the same thing, to go in the same direction, but we don't go there together. Why is that? And how can we change that? Yes, we need to create offers together and to market them together. And again, to market them to local audiences as well. We know that the main share of our greenhouse gases emissions come from flying visitors in. That's something that Thomas is well aware of. But I think that we can work on that by talking to audiences that live close by. That would be a great way of limiting those impacts. Thank you, and we are now getting near the end of our roundtable. I think we can still take a couple of minutes to take questions from the audience, if you have them. And we have the gentleman over there. Good morning. My name is Pierre Anish. I work for Beaux-Arts Consulting. Can everyone hear me? Yes, excellent. Thank you to our speakers, even though it was a short intervention for one of you. Can you give us an example of a location either in France or abroad that really implemented a sustainable tourism strategy that is compatible with the strategy of cultural actors? Places that have implemented such strategies, there's a lot of them. I'm thinking of some of them that were pioneers in the sectors, such as the Brittany region, for example, but also the Auvergne, Nouvelle-Aquitaine, and the Occitanie regions in France. I think those four regions were really pioneers in France. All of them take into account cultural aspects in their offer. It's less true on big cultural sites, admittedly. But for smaller offers, more local offers, for the making your local cultural offers known, that's absolutely true. Like visiting small villages, like the Petite Cité de Caractère label, for example. So there has been a lot of work that has been done there. But I do think that there is more that could be done, especially for bigger sites. But sometimes it's really in silos, because you have a sustainable tourism strategy and then you have a cultural tourism strategy. And again, what I would like to see is a better articulation of that. I would like to see a more coherent offer. For urban destinations as well. In the GDS index, the Global Destination Sustainability Index, Göteborg is the #1 city in Sweden. But Bordeaux is part of the top 5. So Bordeaux really managed to turn around their offer, and they have a great sustainability offer. I suppose that it also covers museums. I don't know. I don't actually know, but I know that Bordeaux and Lyon as well are among the top-rated cities when it comes to those issues. And the Nouvelle-Aquitaine CRT, where Bordeaux is located, is a part of those sectoral organizations. We work with Hôtel Lyon, for example, and they are among the leaders in those sustainability issues. They had created an internal label, I think. It was called Lyon Fair and Solidarity City, something like that. All right. We are now at the end of our allotted time slot, and many thanks. Feel free to talk to our speakers even when they come off stage. Thank you very much.